I'm going to see if that's working. Yes, it's working. Okay. Woo! We're on our way. All right. Okay. So yeah, if we wanted to start doing introductions, obviously people who are watching me know I'm Professor Flowers. My name's Lua, and we're having book club today. Yeah. Yeah, so you'll probably all know me. Jeremy, do you want to go next? And we'll just go, like,
Yeah,
we
sure.
probably are in different orders on our screen, but...
Got you. I am Jeremy. I am an educator and writer and poet out of Houston, Texas. And I've been following this channel for a minute. Real excited to talk about this book because, yeah, as you were saying, it's a banger. I'm glad to see that people are here. And looking forward to getting to talk about this.
Awesome, thanks. Tovio, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm Tovio. I'm a data scientist generally, and I really love this book. I'm trying to read it in Portuguese right now. I read it a couple months ago recently, so yeah, I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, thanks. Nick, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Nick. I have a podcast called Pink Spots. It's supposed to be an advice podcast, but usually people just send me talking prompts, so it's kind of me just going off about whatever. And I also am a co-host on a YouTube channel called A Little to the Left. We just did a stream about a panel about trans sex that I think everybody should watch. It was awesome. And we just talk a lot about sex and gender and relationships and stuff over there. And I'm so excited to be here in general, but especially to talk about this book today. I have some friends who do radical education, and this is a book that's come up so many times in conversation, and I'm glad I had a reason to finally check it off my read list.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Do you mind dropping a link in the chat, on our voice text chat, and then I can share also on YouTube to the podcast?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, thanks. Silverspook, do you want to go next?
Sure, yeah. Hey, everybody, I am Silverspook. I'm a native Hawaiian activist, and I also make video games. And I have, YouTube, Twitch, and lots of social media that I try to share education. And yeah, so I hang out with Lua sometimes, and we do really cool streams when we can. And yeah, so I'm happy to talk about pedagogy of the oppressed under illegal U.S. military occupation in Hawaii.
Yeah, it's gonna not the illegal U.S. occupation, but just how relevant this book's gonna be. Very excited. Corin, do you want to go?
All right, I'm Corey. I'm a multiply disabled trans man. Sometimes I write poetry, sometimes I paint. I don't really think there's much of anything good, but I am here, yes.
Yeah, I really like your artwork. Yeah, Corin has some really great stuff, and also he's a very great writer. Yeah, thanks, Corin. Nikki, do you want to go?
Yeah, my pleasure. Hello, everybody. My name is Nikki. I am a queer disabled abolitionist, and this is my first time with this group. So I'm excited to be here and have a good discussion today.
Welcome, welcome. We're really glad to have you here. And Spud Boy, I don't think we've met yet. Do you want to go?
Yeah. I'm also new to this group. My name's Kyle, and I live in Oregon. Yeah, I've been wanting to read this book for a while, and I saw that you guys were going to be reading it for this group, so I thought it would be a good opportunity to get myself to read it and have a little more engagement with the text.
Awesome. We're really glad to have you here. Okay, sweet. Well, let's dive in. So I think we have just a few people watching. And so for anyone who's watching, this is basically like I have a book club that I do through my YouTube channel. kind of. Like, I had it before my YouTube channel, and then I thought it'd be fun to connect it to that just because I want to read more leftist works, and we tend to focus on non-white people, but we don't have to exclusively. That's just something that I have just been more interested in. And it's something where it's like, I personally don't know a lot. Like, I just am learning. And so sometimes people want me to talk about certain things or certain events, but it's like, I'm actually just learning along with everyone else. It's not really like me teaching something from a place of expertise. Like, I'm like, well, this seems important, so I want to learn about it. So if anyone does want to learn more about pedagogy of the oppressed in a more academic setting where someone really knows what they're talking about, this might not be for you. But if you're just want to learn along with us, then I think that'll be a fun journey. So let's dive in. I have some notes. So every time I start a book club, I take some notes on like the historic context. So to me, this just helps. There we go. To me, this just helps just give a sense of like why someone wrote something. Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's like important to do for studying things, because so often I'll read a book and be like, why is this important? Like, why does this matter? And then you look at the history of the time, you're like, oh, like that makes so much more sense. So I always like to do that before reading a book, and I had a lot of fun doing that. So I'm going to do like a little bit of a presentation on just this context. This is a picture of Paulo Freire. God, I mean, dang it. I'm trying not to cuss as much on stream. Paulo Freire, am I saying that right? Do you know, Tovio? Okay.
Yeah, like Paulo Freire.
Freire. Okay, I'll try to say that right. I'm a bit nervous about saying it wrong. So he was an educated philosopher who's also a Christian socialist, which is something that's interesting because that doesn't always come up. I just think it's interesting with people religious, because sometimes, like, I really attribute Christianity with like colonialism. So it's like nice to know that there are Christians who are not like, you know, a part of that vein or a part of that issue necessarily. Although a lot of Christianity is spread through colonialism and blah, blah, blah. But I just thought it was an important thing to know. So he's born in 1921. He was born to a middle-class family, but he fell into poverty during the Great Depression in 1929, which was caused by the Wall Street stock market crashing. And for me, I did not realize, this sounds like so naive, but I did not realize, I didn't realize that like the Great Depression like affected the entire world. Like, I was like, wait, what? Because I was like, oh, like you always read about how it affected America, but it affected the entire world. And I like looked into this to like try to understand how and why. And basically, when the stock market crashed, the economic depression, especially in Latin America, affected foreign demand for its products and services. And it drastically reduced the international liquidity, which is the access to cash and bonds and things like that. So it greatly reduced access to that, and that caused a depression like across like the world. So so he was also like just going through that, and he was 4 years behind in school, and a lot of this was because he was just hungry all the time. They literally just didn't have enough food, and there's like all these stories like Tovio mentioned that like she's pretty sure she like read something where like he had to like eat a human leg. Like, and when you're reading the intro to this book, or I don't know, remember if it's the intro or forward, because there's so many, but like people are talking about people like eating like human body parts because people are in such a state of hunger that like I guess if someone dies, like they don't let that meat go to waste because that's how desperate people were for food. So he was behind in school because he's hungry, and he also played with a lot of other poor children, and this really is what made him be so interested in oppression and, you know, criticizing class. And it's interesting because like people didn't see him as poor because he was middle class. They saw him as someone who kind of fell into being poor, and he wasn't going to be permanently there, which is ultimately what happened. I think that's kind of how that works with poverty a lot. There's like people who come from that and people who can fall into it, but it's easier for them to get out. And that's what happened. So eventually he studied law. He studied phenomenology, which is the philosophy and study of consciousness. So that makes a lot of sense, like that he's going into pedagogy. He also studied psychology of language. And even though he passed the bar, he never practiced it. he was appointed director of the Pernambuco Department of Education and Culture. And there he worked with the illiterate poor. And I'm guessing it sounds like a lot of the people who were poor, like, were illiterate. Like, so he worked with that population. And in the 1940s, literacy was required for voting. So already that's like really messed up, really classist. Obviously, a lot of people aren't going to be able to vote. And so in 1962, he was able to apply a lot of his theory of pedagogy, and he taught 300 sugarcane harvesters to read in 45 days. So these people can finally vote. Well, the U.S. government didn't like that. It's really funny. I was reading there was a coup that happened in Brazil. And this seems like a little bit of an aside, but it ties into Freire. I thought it was really funny because Kennedy was like, hey, Brazil, can you support us if we invade Cuba? And then Brazil was like, oh, I don't support that. They were like, I don't support communism, but I support their right to self-determination. So we're going to stay out of this, which to me is kind of annoying because I support communism, but it was a very milquetoast answer. And Kennedy was like, no, he just I just imagine his eyes turning into flames and being like, fuck you. And then after that, basically I was reading this Wikipedia page. I was like, I feel like a coup is about to happen. I don't know. And then the next section is 1964, the Brazilian coup. So yeah, they tried to paint the president at the time, who was Goulart, tried to paint him as a communist, even though he wasn't. He was very center left. They overthrew him, and when they overthrew him, essentially they also targeted anyone who they thought was a communist. Freire actually was a socialist, but they pretty much anyone they who was even associated with that, and they largely targeted professors, students, journalists. And they tortured them. They wasn't just in the U.S. where they were you could lose your job, which is still awful. They tortured people. It was awful. Thousands and thousands of people died. It was so messed up. But yeah, Freire was a part of that, and he was exiled. Let's see, I wrote this down somewhere. Sorry, I kind of lost my spot because I was not going off notes. Basically, he was exiled. He was in prison for 70 days. Oh, there we are. And he eventually was able to return to Brazil and everything, but it's just a really rough time. And in 1967, I think after all this, he wrote Education as the Practice of Freedom. And then after that, he wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is his most famous work. And to give a little context for Pedagogy of the Oppressed, it's in response to Franz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth, or it can be seen as that, or an extension of that. Freire really believed that education could not be divorced from politics. The acts of teaching and learning are considered political in and of themselves, and he focuses on the term consciousness. Oh, sorry, I was thinking Nkrumah because he has a different term, but consciousness. In Portuguese, it's conscientização. I'm messing that up. I'm gonna try to say that, but I'm talking a lot, but basically it's really about praxis, and which is the engagement of theory, application, evaluation, reflection. And yeah, he's just really all about that in a nutshell. And I thought this was interesting, as of 2016, Pedagogy of the Oppressed is the third most cited book in social sciences. So it just really gives a sense of of how much it affected people. It affected a lot of liberation movements, including indigenous movements, Black liberation, all these things. So yeah, I'm just really stoked for it. But yeah, I've been talking a lot. That's a little bit of just the background on the book, and the rest is we're gonna go over the introduction, forward, and preface. And yeah, I guess any thoughts on that before going on? Because I feel I just talked a lot and want to hear what other people have to say.
Just when I read it, I was I don't feel that anything in it was new to me. And I mean that. I was thinking about it just hit me how influential this book is and was, because it's kind of when you watch a film that you've heard influenced all these other films that you like, and you watch it and you're just whoa, the full scope of how much it's influenced art hits you. That's how I felt about this book. I'm like, I can see now reading it, I can see the influences of it on so much other theory that I've read. So it was, and to know that it was written in 1968, you know, and has been this influential is just incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all right. Well, I guess we'll dive into the introduction, and I'll just share some of the notes I have. Um so the first thing I have is this quote that says, "Reading Pedagogy of the Oppressed also gave me the inner strength to begin the arduous process of transcending a colonial existence that is almost culturally schizophrenia." I think that's meant to say schizophrenic. Sometimes it autocorrects things. Being present and yet not visible, being visible and not present. So I just thought that was really interesting. There's something about, like, you know, just like when I think about being Black, like there's a way where I am like present but not visible, like I'm just kind of there. And then there's a way where I'm visible in a way where I think sometimes people feel threatened by me, but then I'm like not really a part of the norm. So that's something that really resonated with me. And yeah, I think just maybe going on to some other stuff, like this intro mentions like how many people risk cruel punishment just to read Freire. And I don't know, I think it just gives like a sense, like I remember this part saying, like, in the US, like a lot of people haven't read it, and that's kind of like the censorship that we face today, like people just not hearing of something. And
Yeah.
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 Please chime in.
One of the things that I kind of thought of, and that is being, you're kind of pointing to in these early quotes, is the dissonance that comes from the learning and unlearning of the like cultural mores and cultural norms that you know, I was raised in the United States, and what the institutional education provided me was wrong. I mean, I look back on it today and I think, wow, so much of that is just straight wrong. It was just inaccurate information. And in my, you know, early days of abolitionist thinking or unlearning of things, I remember feeling this odd dissonance in my mind of how could they have taught me something so wrong when this is not the truth or the reality of the situation. And so the feeling of being, how do you say, kind of stepping into a new space and almost being othered because of the knowledge that I have gained, that is not of the norm, that is not what is being taught in like mainstream school and public schools and stuff like that. It puts you in a space where you really just want, I feel hungry for more all the time at this point in my life. It's just, I want to correct those formative years and inaccurate learning. And I think that's what's getting addressed in at least the early stages of this book, or early parts.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hosting a book club tomorrow, and we read Rest is Resistance. And in that, she brings up her experience teaching in schools and seeing, or working in schools and seeing the ways in which we teach small children to deny their own bodily needs. Talking about how like children are not allowed to go to the bathroom when they need to. They have to wait for certain breaks. They have to get permission. Everything's scheduled, you know, and controlled. And it kind of, to me, was nice to read these two books together and have that integration of the ways in which these institutions as a whole really seek to control. He talked about, you know, the patriarchal structures of these institutions and how that's replicated in families. And yeah, just, I had a similar experience, Nikki, of going through school and just being like, how are we taught these things that are just not true? They're lies. and the ways that we're taught to bow to authority and to think that there's this universal truth that we're not supposed to question. I don't know if I have anywhere to go with that, but it just brought to mind. I've been pretty outspoken about being kind of against the institution of schools for a while now. And, but at the same time, I like that this book addresses that, but also upholds education as a tool of liberation. So it's not that education is bad, it's that these institutions are corrupt and just replicating, teaching us how to be under capitalism and colonization.
Yeah, I wanted to add here, first of all, that Nick's book club is awesome. Y'all should go to it.
Oh, thanks,
I wish
Jeremy.
that I could. Yeah, I wish I could. I had more time to go to it, but the times that I remember being in your book club, it was really good. But then the second thing is, for me, as a teacher, first of all, the critiques of the school system just in general already are like very very accurate, and like it's important for people to understand that the education that you get in schools is not manufactured to teach you the liberatory tools that you need to like even understand what exactly you're going through, much less to combat it. But then, secondly, for me specifically, I live in a town that's right next to a city called Sugarland, and unfortunately, the timing of us reading this right now, combined with what's happening in Sugarland right now, is extremely, extremely relevant. There were a group of convict laborers who were sugar harvesters that a mass grave of them was found in Sugarland a few years back. And recently, the school, it was found on school property, the property of the school district there. And they've been in a battle of, hey, we want to keep this land, we want to build our building on it. They went ahead and built the building, and then they said, okay, but it's okay because we're going to be teaching the children about all of this this stuff that we found out about convict laboring. And so they put a whole bunch of stuff about the harvesting of sugar, the labor system, slavery. They said they were going to put it in the curriculum, but then seeing the way that it has played out over the past couple of years, as far as and like pedagogy of the oppressed gets into this, the neoliberal way that they have to excuse a lot of this has just been like a real time exploration of all of the problems and themes that are brought up in this book. So I'm gonna cut myself off because I have like way too much to say about this, given like how thick I've been involved in this recently. But yeah, I just wanted to chime in with that.
I mean, that's definitely something you can talk about more. Like, that's, yeah, I don't know. I definitely want to get into stuff that's like happening right now or today. But also, if you want to, that's okay. You don't have to. But yeah, and also like to be clear, like we're kind of trying to focus on like the. We're not trying to talk about the whole book at this point. We're trying to talk about like the intro, preface, and like I don't know. There's like so many forward. There's like 3 different things. I like the intros are just like a sixth of the book. It's kind of funny, but I think everyone might have a different book too. So I don't know. Maybe I should just like also ask too. Did everyone like read the intro, preface, and forward, or do they have the same one? Because I know that can be kind of a problem.
I don't think the audio included it.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, yeah. So the one that I have is the 50th anniversary. I think.
Oh my gosh! I didn't know that was a thing. Wow.
Yeah. And it had an intro, and I think that the preface and the foreword are the same across editions, but the intro might be different from what I can see.
Yeah.
Because he talks a little bit more about like more contemporary politics, but anyway, yeah, that's
okay. Cool. Well, I'll just try to like. I'm gonna just try to like.
Same one.
Okay. Well, I didn't even know it was the 50th anniversary. Just that's so funny. I'll just try to like breeze through this then, since there's always like a little bit of an issue where we don't have like the same copy or whatever. But yeah, I thought it was interesting. In this intro, this person talks about how Freire used the word oppressed as opposed to like pedagogy, the disenfranchised, because the term oppressed requires there to be an oppressor. And I just really appreciate that. I felt like so like kind of like complicated too, because like no one like wants to see themselves as being oppressed. Like I think everyone wants to like live a happy life, and like actually coming to terms with the fact that you live under something oppressive is like just really, really hard. So I don't know. I just thought that was like just very powerful and kind of complicated. And another thing that I thought was really funny in this is in this intro, like this person says, one question that I have for you all, for all those highly literate academics who find Diderot and Freire discourse so difficult to understand is, why is it that a 16-year-old boy and a poor semi-literate woman could so easily understand and connect with the complexity of both Freire's and Diderot's language and ideas, and the academics who should be the most literate find the language incomprehensible? Because I think that's really funny, because apparently like a lot of people are being like, oh, like this is just too hard to understand, which like blows my mind. I'm like, I think from what I've read, it seems like a lot more understandable than a lot of academic work I've read. So I just love how this person's like throwing shade and being like, listen, like so many people can get this and you can't. And like, you can't, probably because of like maybe some classism and things like that. So
I saw that on Goodreads when I logged the book. I skimmed through some reviews, and some people were saying like, oh, it's so hard to understand, it's super academic. And then other people were like, no, it's not. Like, it's so much easier to grasp than a lot of other things. So I did find that interesting, just even looking, because I always like to see, you know, what are people saying about a book. And yeah, I could see that discourse happening in the reviews.
Wow.
Of a lot of people who like, yeah, just saying that it was like inaccessible. And I'm like, no. It's definitely not as inaccessible as a lot of other stuff that I've tried to read.
Yeah. I mean, I think
I have a question or a thought about that. Do you think that people believe or feel that it is inaccessible because it requires imagining or dreaming of a world that doesn't currently exist? And academics live in the world of kind of black and white research or science, or however you want to say. And in order to, I feel like, truly seek a lot of liberation, you have to dream about what your liberation looks like. It's not already defined. And so you have to step outside of the boxes that have been created by the institutions, by the governments, to think about what you can create, what you want your world to look like in a liberated setting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of like why it's hard. And I think another part of it is like when people, like when, you know, Freire says something like, I need to like maybe like find a quote. I don't know. Okay, like this isn't Freire, but that quote I read earlier, like reading Pedagogy of the Press also gave me the inner strength to begin the arduous process of transcending a colonial existence that is almost culturally schizophrenic, being present and yet not visible, being visible and not present. Like, that's not Freire, but let's say that Freire says something like that. Like I'm immediately like, oh, like I totally know what that means. Like as a Black person, like I already can get an idea of what that means, and I'm so sure that so many people who with a marginalized status are like, oh, I know what that means. Like if you're like disabled or poor or like whatever, you have an image of that. And I think for people who like don't have that experience, they're like, what the fuck does that mean? I have no idea, because they have, and there's like all this stuff that it probably sounds cryptic if you don't have those set of experiences, which is why I think like a lot of like bougie academics are like, I don't get this. I need someone to like explain to me what oppression is, because I like have never had these experiences. So I bet it would be hard to understand if you like don't.
Like if your existence was present and visible, then how, you know, I could see that you just can't connect with this quote and understand it without someone just explaining it to you.
Yeah, like I think they do need it broken down, because but then I think it's just frustrating because like they're just so uninterested to like actually have people break that down for them, because they're so classist. I think like a lot of academia is like so classist. But anyways, I suspect that that's also like a part of what's happening as well. Like just, yeah.
Yeah, I think along with that, pedagogy of the press, or the way I think about it, is it's in a larger dialogue also. Because like, you know, even the conscientization of Freire, you have Nkrumah's conscientism. That's not an accident, right? And like, you have like this whole, you know, global set of liberation philosophy and psychology that's like very much in the material world, right? And most of academia, like Western academia, is not material. It tends to be like universalist and transcendental, right? So like you have this, you have these movements all over the world that Freire is like looking at and in dialogue with, and also just even localized to Pernambuco. Like you have all the heroes in Pernambuco are like kind of like gangster Robin Hood characters, or they're people who like broke away and started like essentially communes, like revolutionary communes, like over the prior couple hundred years. Like there's this massive, like, so people, poor people especially, their heroes like fit into a certain like there's like a genre of heroes, right? And I think academia doesn't have those same heroes probably, right? So like having that context for dialogue, how do I say this? Freire is creating dialogue, right? But when academics like encounter that, I think they're not looking at it like dialogue. They're looking at it like this is a static piece of work that they need to understand, and they're not putting it in the context of the larger dialogue that was happening at the time and that continues to happen. Or that's my suspicion on a lot of that.
Which is kind of ironic, given that's sort of his whole point here. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because it is something that's collaborative and builds and is part of a larger framework. And yeah, I think academics come to stuff like this is an isolated set thing that I can consume and understand and then move on from.
Right. And like on that note, if I can add something too real quick, I was talking to my friend about this book, and they mentioned that there's this thing called the theater of the oppressed, which is like for situations like this, I'll drop it in the voice chat, that like people can come together and they can act out like different situations where they're experiencing oppression, and it's like, okay, now you can like get an understanding of what people are actually talking about and experiencing, because it's like supposed to be an interactive and communal sort of thing, not just something that you're studying for book knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was like something in the introduction, and we don't have to dwell on it if other people didn't read that part, but there was something about like how it gets like there's an issue about like Freire's work getting watered down in academia, or like people like trying to teach it and then like it just being about method rather than like a dialogue that's going to be changing, and that you know that leads to action and then constantly like being revised. Like, and I didn't see a concrete example. I kind of like got an image in my head about like how that could be watered down, but I don't know if anyone like has any thoughts on that. But I do get like worried about like, I don't know, like in academia, just like even, I don't know, this is, maybe I could be like overreaching, but like even in academia there's like I don't know. Actually, I'm gonna like hold that off that thought because I have to think about it more. But I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on academia like watering things down in that way.
It's not exactly that, but there was a thing that I think ties in the intro that I read where they're talking about in academia people assuming like radicalized identities as like a commoditized identity, like I'm Marxist, and then other people being like, oh, I'm a Maoist. Like becomes like a tiered thing, but it's an assumed identity. He refers to it as the person who wrote the intro as like a commoditized identity, because it's not really like engaging with you know the people that they're supposed to be educating and engaging with, you know, oppressed populations as like a collaborative thing. that it, it's this a very hierarchical type of identity status.
Yeah, like it's something that I've like that's something like really frustrated me, like how people like will read a lot of theory, but then they're like not plugged in to the world in any way that's like and it's kind of like a bit I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but like when people like read a lot of theory, like they heavily identify with being like I'll see like also like I'll see people like on Twitter like they'll like really like they'll just like love Marx and Engels, and there's like the picture of them with like the big beards. They're like, I just love beards because I love Marx and Engels so much, and like and then they just like don't like do anything like in like just they just don't do anything besides like read this theory. And reading theory is like really important, but like it just seems like there's just like something weird going on where I'm like, wow, like there's like all these communists or there's all these anarchists, and then it's like, but what are you doing? Like, what are I don't know. I just kind of get like frustrated with that. I don't know if that's
totally.
what you're. Yeah.
Well, it was more. I mean, yeah, I think that's part of it. But in the intro, I was talking about specifically in academia, in like the higher education as an institution. But I think it definitely ties into how people kind of glom onto an identity as like it becomes more like sectarian, and it leads to like clashing rather than like a collaboration.
Yeah, that could be a good segue into the section where they talk about sectarianism. So yeah, sectarianism is just kind of like, for anyone who doesn't know, because I had to look it up, it's just like kind of like having like fanaticism for like a particular group. Like I kind of tend to think of like religious fanaticism. I also kind of in my mind, there's obviously like political sectarianism where, when you think of like Trump supporters just having like the Trump gear everywhere, and they're just but yeah, it talks about like how right sectarianism wants to slow down the historical process to domesticate time and like men and women. Like I kind of think of like, just when I think of like even in America, when they're like we need to get back to the 1950s so we can get back to this like thing that like was never really that great, like as far as like when you think about like the nuclear family and all of that and all the sexism that came with that. But it also talks about leftist sectarianism, which I thought was very relevant. And it talks about like there's this, basically it's like doomerism, like just this feeling of, well, if I'm understanding doomerism right, because it might mean something other than I understand, but just feeling like there's like no or fatalism is how it's described here. So I just thought it was like really interesting that like both of these people can have issues with sectarianism, and this person says, oh, I think this is actually is it Freire talking about this at this point? But whoever wrote the preface,
it is.
Okay, so both types of sectarianism, treating history in an equally proprietary fashion, end up without the people, which is another way of being against them. And I was like, whoa, like, yeah, that just like really hit hard, because I think we have to remember that we want to always like be for the people and be with the people. And there's a way that like, I think in leftist space, like there's like a way that we like push people out. I definitely think there's like ways to like have boundaries and be like, we're not going to stand for like X, Y, and Z. Like we're not going to tolerate these things, but also like doing so like with a sense of like being with the people. And yeah, I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think with the left sectarianism, how I read it was like this idea that like, like in Marxist theory,
Cringe.